Oh great, you got a new Samsung phone? Oh no wait, you're in an Exynos country? Sucks to be you. Hope you get to the end of this video before the battery dies. Careful you don't trip over those low benchmark scores. Okay look, as much as many people on Twitter and elsewhere like to endlessly trash Samsung's Exynos processors, that criticism isn't entirely unfounded. So why does everyone seem to hate Exynos? And what's with all the drama about Exynos 990 in the new Galaxy Note 20? Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss future videos, and we'll jump right in. The disparity in performance of Samsung Exynos and Qualcomm Snapdragon chips in the same model of phone has come into sharp focus recently. That's because of reports that the new Galaxy Note 20 will use the Exynos 990 in Europe, same as the S20, while the US, Korea and China will get a model with a Snapdragon 865 Plus, which is an upgrade from the S20 in those countries. Insult to injury, some Samsung fans claim, after the Exynos-powered Galaxy S20 fell behind the Snapdragon version in terms of battery life and some other benchmarks. Basically, if you lived in Europe, you could expect slightly worse performance out of your S20. With the new Note then, you'd expect an even bigger gap in performance between phones in different regions, because one region is getting a minor CPU upgrade, and the other, which is already coming from behind, is not. It's all the more disappointing given that rumours had been swirling that a new and improved Exynos chip was on the cards for the international version of the Note 20, just as we saw in the Note 10 last year. But Exynos hating isn't a new phenomenon. It's a side effect of the long-running Samsung strategy of dual-sourcing processors for its high-end phones. And Exynos' lagging behind in some areas has been a thing since at least 2018. Dual-sourcing in itself isn't a bad thing. Samsung's traditionally used Qualcomm in the US because it has all the CDMA patents nailed down, which you need for legacy Sprint and Verizon support. Internationally, Exynos has been more prominent. It's produced by Samsung LSI, the group's semiconductor division. This approach gives Samsung more freedom to choose the chip that makes the most sense for any given scenario. For example, in 2015, having Exynos as an alternative gave Samsung a strong backup option when Qualcomm's Snapdragon 810 tested poorly, ultimately leading to it being snubbed in the Galaxy S6 in all markets. Almost everyone else making an Android flagship that year had to just suck it up and use a chip that ran hot and used a lot of power. Conversely, in the early days of 4G LTE, Samsung favoured 4G-equipped Qualcomm chips for countries with LTE, and shipped 3G-only Exynos versions of phones in countries with little or no 4G coverage. And in a way, when you have two different high-end chipsets powering different versions of the same phone, it's only natural that some would pull ahead in different areas, whether single-core performance, multi-core, graphics, or battery. Both chips have to basically do the same thing and enable the same features, but they're being developed and manufactured completely separately from one another, so you wouldn't necessarily expect benchmarks to be exactly identical across the board. Exynos' fall from glory really started with the Galaxy S9. That's where we started to see a demonstrable gap in performance compared to the Qualcomm Snapdragon versions. An investigation by AnandTech at the time found that the Exynos 9810's high-performance M3 cores were a major culprit. They'd fire up to very high clock speeds and consume lots of power, and this was exacerbated by issues with the CPU governor, the software that handles how performance ramps up or down to meet the demands of the phone. The issue was part hardware, part software, but the result was notably worse battery life in the Exynos Galaxy S9s versus their American and Chinese cousins with the Snapdragon chip. The following year was a bit more of a fair fight with the Galaxy S10. Benchmarks from AnandTech showed either Snapdragon or Exynos would pull ahead, depending on whether you favoured single-core or multi-core. The Exynos models generally also produce weaker battery life, but this could vary depending on how you tested it. The Galaxy S20 was another matter though. The Exynos and Snapdragon versions were tuned slightly differently when the screen was running in the default 60Hz mode, so some benchmarks were hard to compare directly, but what wasn't open to debate was the weaker battery life of the Exynos S20s. Clearly, the benchmarks showed the Exynos 990 powered phones getting poorer longevity compared to their Qualcomm counterparts. According to AnandTech's numbers, you were looking at up to an hour less in PCMark's Work 2.0 benchmarks based on the Galaxy S20 Ultra in 60Hz mode. The Exynos model, it turned out, was also more prone to throttling, scaling back performance as the device heats up, in GPU-intensive tests according to AnandTech's numbers. Considering how expensive top-end flagships like the Galaxy S20 Ultra are, it's understandable how Samsung fans in Europe in particular might feel shortchanged. They're paying just as much as Korean and American S20 owners, but getting a phone that doesn't last as long and maybe doesn't perform quite as well in games. What's especially jarring is that battery life in particular is one of the most relatable smartphone benchmarks, as opposed to more abstract things like single or multi-core performance. So for people in Exynos countries, the only option if you want what pretty clearly seems to be the superior Galaxy S20 model is to import one from Snapdragon territory. But then you risk running into warranty issues, problems with features like VoLTE and Wi-Fi calling, and that compatibility situation has only become more complex now that 5G is thrown into the mix. That's before you even consider import duties, potential region locking in the software, and of course the fact you can't finance an imported S20 through your carrier, which is how most people buy new phones. For Samsung's part, it's always said that all versions of the Galaxy S20 deliver an equivalent experience. A statement from March tells us, "The Galaxy S20 is a smartphone that's been reimagined to change the way you experience the world, and depending on the region, the Galaxy S20 will ship with either the Exynos 990 or the Snapdragon 865. Both the Exynos and Snapdragon processors go through the same strict and rigorous real-life testing scenarios in order to deliver a consistent and optimal performance over the entire lifecycle of the smartphone." However, actions speak louder than words. In a rare move this year, Samsung chose Snapdragon for its home market of South Korea, a small deal in terms of business, but a very big deal symbolically, leading to reports in the Korean press that Samsung LSI felt humiliated by the decision and tried unsuccessfully to have it reversed. And late last year, it was reported that Samsung would likely be moving away from using those custom cores in its Exynos processors, based on news of the 290-strong team responsible for that project being laid off from its Austin, Texas R&D center. If true, this wouldn't mean Exynos is going away, but rather Samsung would probably just go back to using off-the-shelf ARM Cortex designs instead of trying to roll its own. Also, if true, obviously this isn't something you do if you're feeling great about the performance of recent Exynos chips that have used those high-power custom cores. Bottom line is that next year's Exynos will probably look a little different as a result, and hopefully avoid the performance disparity that we've seen in the S9, S10, and S20, leading to less consternation all round. However, that's little consolation for Europeans eyeing a Note 20 Ultra, but feeling galled at having to pay top dollar, or I guess top euro, for an Exynos 990 version with weaker longevity. So it's easy to look at the online petitions and caustic forum posts and dismiss this all as overblown nerd rage. After all, the vast majority of Galaxy S20 and Note 20 owners will be perfectly happy with their phones and never even be aware of the differences between Snapdragon and Exynos. But based on benchmark after benchmark, those differences are real, and inevitably year after year it's been Exynos that's fallen short, and consequently Exynos countries feeling like they're getting the short end of the stick. Perhaps enthusiasts shouldn't feel personally slighted that their phone is a bit worse in one or two areas compared to a phone sold in a different country. But equally, it's foolish to pretend the issue doesn't exist. So what do you think? Will you get an Exynos Galaxy Note 20, import one from Snapdragon land, or just buy a different phone altogether? Share your thoughts down in the comments and be sure to subscribe to Android Central here on YouTube for more Galaxy Note 20 goodness in future. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.